All right, and we're recording. We are on page 25. We ended right at the chapter. This is so cool. Makes it an easy start. Anything left over from last week that anybody wants to talk about before we get started? Anything? Unfinished business? Come on, somebody's got unfinished business. Come on. Yeah. But nothing we need to talk about, huh? Okay, so we have been talking about the hero and the heroine's journey. That was chapter 2. And we are now segueing into the first half of life. So the hero's journey was superimposing the shape of the hero's journey, that circular journey, right? From being kicked out of the life that you know, and the wounding and the tasks and so on and so forth, superimposing that over the shape of the first and second halves of life. So he's kind of bringing these two ideas together so that we're getting more and more of a sense of the shape of our journeys, the map of our journey. And so now he's going to dive into the first half of life and contrast that with the second half of life. And this is a great little epigraph here. James Hollis, Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life. I wanted to take a little time with this one. The world is more magical, less predictable, more autonomous, less controllable, more varied, less simple, more infinite, less knowable, more wonderfully troubling than we could have imagined being able to tolerate when we were young. What a quote, huh? But I love what it's saying. More magical and less predictable, more autonomous, less controllable. So autonomous, able to run on its own, right? We all think the world can't turn without us, but it actually does. And we can't control the turning. So the world is more autonomous, less controllable, more varied, less simple, more infinite, less knowable, and more wonderfully troubling than we could have imagined being able to tolerate when we were young. So there is a different perspective that we start to bring to life as we get older. And it happens sort of automatically to a certain extent, where you just get enough of the road in your rear view mirror, you know, where you can actually see the panorama and the shape of the road. And it really comes home, and has come home for me, in watching children grow up and movie stars get old. I don't know about you all, but it's just so weird to watch these stars that we grew up with, and they're old now, you know. And the kids, that, you know, the couple of generations now are getting to be kids. They're not babies anymore. It's just amazing. But that changes things. And I don't think there's any substitute for it. It's just time having lived and watched and experienced starts to change things. And the certainty that you had in your 20s really just starts to evaporate. And you realize that life isn't what you thought it was, and things aren't turning out the way you thought they would, and all these things that are just so different. But that's not a bad thing. And this idea of leaving our certainty behind is the hugest piece of it all. I mean, we just got to get over certainty, because that's what obsessively drives us into all sorts of non-kingdom directions. Anyone have any comments or thoughts about just that epigraph? Does it ring true? Do you like it? William, are you thinking in other lines here? Come on. He's our official liberal.
Disagreeing, nothing.
Yeah,
to
any
add.
disagreements, William? Come on, it wouldn't be a complete night if there was at least one of them.
Not as yet.
Okay, all right, good.
I was going to say, in this crazy world where there's just sometimes so much negative news or something, maybe this is a good way to look at it, in a just knowing that the world's a little crazy and unpredictable, and maybe it's a little more freeing rather than just trying to make the world, you know, like you said, trying to clutch onto it and totally be reacting to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But I like his thought that the world is more magical. You know, if we can bring that back into it.
Well, I mean, magical versus
Crazy.
Crazy and sad. Like the stock market went down 1,100 points today and all this stuff. And to maybe look at it a little more magical rather than, sorrowful, I like that way of looking at it.
Well, I don't know if the stock market can be considered magical in any way, shape, or form.
But they're just gonna go up and down. I don't know. To me, it was uplifting to read that. So,
But it is less predictable, right?
right.
Maybe
But-
Vegas, if you're winning, it's magical
There
Yeah.
you go. There you go.
at that moment in time.
Your money's here now and now it's gone. Yeah.
That's magical. Sure, sure. But when you think about the way that you looked at things as a kid and then you grew up, is there some of that we can bring back? Or the way that we looked at things, even just the natural things in life, can we get some of that sense of magic back, that wonder, that awe? I think that's what he's talking about. And we have rationally explained everything to the nth degree so much that the magic is all gone, and that's a shame. That's why we can't even look at the Bible and consider the mythology, consider the magic, the magical way that the people looked at life and the world and creation in ancient times. It was so much more magical than it is now. And they wrote their sacred books from that point of view. And we're trying to read it from a completely logical, rational, scientific point of view. And it's no wonder we don't comprehend. It's no wonder that we misinterpret. We need to move back into that mindset, get back into that epic mindset, right? If we're really going to re-enter the experience.
Mhm.
So I like that idea of magical, the wonder of it all. Anyway, I cannot think of a culture in human history before the present postmodern era that did not value law, tradition, custom, authority, boundaries, and morality of some clear sort. These containers give us the necessary security, continuity, predictability, impulse control, and ego structure that we need before the chaos of real life shows up. Healthily conservative people tend to grow up more naturally and more happily than those who receive only free-form, build-it-yourself worldviews, in my studied opinion. And we have to remember that conservative here is being used beyond just the political understanding of it, right? We're talking about people who are steeped in tradition, people who are trying to hold on to traditional roots and value that law and order. And of course, that creeps into the politics, but it's transcends the politics here. So when he uses conservative here, think of it with the larger C, I guess.
Mhm.
Here is my conviction. Without law in some form, and also without butting up against that law, we cannot move forward easily and naturally. The rebellions of 2-year-olds and teenagers are in our hard wiring, and we have to have something hard and half good to rebel against. We need a worthy opponent against which we test our mettle. As Rilke put it, when we are only victorious over small things, it leaves us feeling small. You need a very strong container to hold the contents and contradictions that arrive later in life. You ironically need a very strong ego structure to let go of your ego. You need to struggle with the rules more than a bit before you throw them out. You only internalize values by butting up against external values for a while. All of this builds the strong self that can positively obey Jesus and die to self and die to itself. In fact, far too many, especially women and disadvantaged people, have lived very warped and defeated lives because they tried to give up a self that was not there yet. So I want to stop there and go back over these 3 paragraphs. But I thought before we do that last line, I would like to ask some of the ladies here, how does that strike you?
Yeah.
Far too many, especially women and disadvantaged people, have lived very warped and defeated lives because they tried to give up a self that was not there yet. How does that make you feel? Are you agreeing with it? Do you see where he's going, or what do you think?
I think that in our culture, and certainly in, say, my parents' generation, I could see a lot of that happening just because of the differential of power. I think it's evened out a lot more with our generation. And women being able to work and actually have their own credit card, big deal. So, but I understand what he's saying, because what I've also worked with in therapy is wonderful, wonderful women who have been incredible mothers young and never really got to develop a sense of self before they gave it up as mothers nurturing their children. So, but they develop it later.
Is that squaring with the rest of you ladies? What, Becky, you said that you understand what he's trying to say. Could you rephrase what you interpret him trying to say in that sentence?
I think what he's trying to say, I hate that word work. That's just like awful.
You're right.
Jeez.
That's why I wanted to discuss this, because it's a pretty
Yeah.
strong sentence.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is that for women and people disadvantaged, i.e. people who grew up in a culture where they had less power, that to survive, they weren't able to develop a strong sense of self in the way that people in power automatically can, privileged automatically can. I think it was more like that it's more a disempowerment than a warped. It's weird.
Well,
So
it's
goes-
also putting it's also putting women in the category of the disadvantaged. And then we know history, right? When women have really been disadvantaged for, many generations of things. When you look at history, they really have tied their identity to men in most cases throughout history, or on the coattails of a man, really. So maybe that's what he's trying to say. But yeah, I think warped is a pretty tough word also. Defeated. I mean, I can't, I look at my mother, she's almost 92. She became a mother, was married and became a mother at the age of 17. So basically my mom and dad kind of grew up together. She really didn't have much of a life of her own other than raising a family and following my dad's, career around the world and such. So, but she had dreams that she never aspired to keep. We've talked about that, like what would she have wanted to become, if she wasn't married so young, that kind of thing, and had kids so quickly. But she also says that, my dad allowed her to travel the world, and those are things she would not have gotten if she hadn't married him. So it's kind of a trade-off. She did give up some things, but she got some things as well. But her identity did suffer, because she does think that her identity suffered because of that. So
I think you
That
can
does, that, I'm sorry. Yeah,
No, go
yeah,
ahead.
that did help me a little bit, because I think it was the contrast between they've lived very warped and defeated lives because they tried to give up a self that was not there yet. And I guess for me, when I think about my own mother's life, she was very shaped by the culture of the time, that really encouraged women to get married as soon as possible. And my mom, I think, bucked the culture of the day. I don't think willingly, but she was 29 before she got married, which was like old maids in that day, because I was born in the 50s. So as you can imagine, it was kind of much more kind of traditional, conservative. Women have their place, and they need to be helpmates of men to further their journey and all of that. And I think she lived under that constraint. And I think when her marriage to my dad started going downhill a bit, and he became pretty dominating, and not allowing her to express herself. I think she became defeated, but took up passive aggressiveness as her way of, kind of, that's a warping, I think, as I see it, because she didn't have a voice and she tried to express it in more dysfunctional ways. And and unfortunately, I think she chose alcoholism as a way of escape. And I think she gave up a self that I don't think was fully formed at that point in her life. But I look at my own journey too, and I wouldn't say, I think maybe the choices I made, warped, kind of bristles me a little bit. It's kind of like, oh, this is a little strong here. I saw the progression of her life, and the personality that I had was kind of geared against that. And the culture that I grew up in as a young adult was just blossoming into feminism. And it was encouraging people to think out of the box, all over the place in terms of, the roles, your expectations for yourself, relationships, what you were desiring in that. And I think a lot of my, at least what I thought was my freedom at that point in time was, the encouragement to branch out, to take care of myself, to be self-sufficient, that I could have a career of my own. I didn't have to rely on a husband to support the family and do those kinds of things. But was that my true self? I don't think so. As I think about it and what I've experienced up to this point in time, I think it was built on an internal journey of fear. And so I think it was in reaction to life circumstances. So I don't know, but that ego structure that I built up did allow me to survive in some very appropriate ways, according to the culture, at least of the time. But I don't think it furthered my spiritual journey very far. Yeah.
But remember, we're talking about the first half of life.
Yeah.
And so we're not talking about, building your true self or exploring your true self. We are talking about building the container, the egoic container.
Oh yeah.
And so the main idea he's trying to get across is, if in the second half of life, we are going to surrender the ego, we're going to let the ego shatter. We're going to break it open so that we can, just like the seed that Jesus talks about, unless it falls in the ground and splits open and dies, then you're not going to have a plant. It's the same thing here. The ego has to fall, shatter, split open, and what comes forth is going to be the second half of life journey. But if you haven't built a good container, if your first half of life journey has not really built a healthy ego, then you really don't have anything to let go of. And so for those of us who, for whatever reason, and he's saying it happened a lot because of the way that women weren't allowed to be able to build their own content, their own container, the structure, because they were relegated, or other classes of people that were relegated to positions where they couldn't do that. They couldn't really perform and build. Well, then they're going to have a harder time letting go of something that's not fully formed. That's the point he's making.
Gotcha.
Whether you agree with it or not, that's the point he's making. Now, furthermore, he's going to say the way that you build a healthy ego, this healthy container, is by having it come up against rules and laws and customs and rituals and conform to it and then rebel against it. If you don't have a worthy opponent and something to really rebel against, then you're going to be left feeling small. If you only overcome small things, that quote from Rilke. And so this is the idea he's starting to build. We need to have those what are typically more conservative ideas of law and order and culture and so on and so forth, tradition, because that's what helps us to form a healthy container. And then we're going to have to break past that. Right? So this is the kind of idea that he's forming here. And
That's
so
helpful, Dave.
that's where the idea for this idea for women and for other disadvantaged classes, because it has been harder for them historically to be able to do what we're talking about doing.
It makes me think of, there's this concept I've been playing around with clinically. It's called fictionalism. And one of the ideas presented, it's like, we believe certain fictions early in life that we carry with us. For example, we might all know that men and women are equal, but there are a lot of people that function in society that's not aligned with that belief, essentially. And there are a lot of women that harbor that thought deep down inside, and a lot of men still hold on to those thoughts. Even though if you ask them, they would say, yes, of course, men and women are equal. There is this underlying bias that shapes things, essentially. And I can see that word warp as being a part of that, essentially.
That's cool.
It's like this story that we tell ourselves and we forget to question that, shapes things, basically.
So it's almost like your walk hasn't caught up with your talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that would probably need to be the case in any minority, like we have to, like when James Brown was saying, I'm Black and I'm proud, nobody was feeling that at the time necessarily.
Yeah. Well, I love the analogy of the ship at sea. The mind is the tiller. You can turn that wheel any way you want to turn, but the ship is going to take its sweet time to actually turn. And that really represents more of the unconscious. It represents the emotions that just take longer to follow suit, even after we consciously say what we believe, and we believe that we believe it, but it still isn't driving the bus. And that's the thing that we got to understand, the mind isn't driving the bus. Those unconscious core beliefs are driving the bus, and that takes a lot longer time to deal with. But building that first container is essential. And to the extent that it's done well and healthily, even as a first half of life expression, okay, it's still focused outward. It's not dealing with the true self. It's still dealing with externals and all of that. But if it's healthy and it's functional, then we're in good position to be able to enter the second half of life. And the way that we develop that is not by just having a wide open playing field and no rules. It's the rules, it's the law, it's the customs, it's the culture, it's the tradition that gives us a contained playing field within which to develop and then to push against and rebel against. For the 2-year-old, it's just rebelling against mom and dad, right? You learn to say no and you use it incessantly. With the teenager, it's more complicated, because there's a lot more things to rebel against. But we need something to rebel against. And I think part of the problem that our younger generations have is that they don't have that much that's holding them in place. Probably in parenting, you've heard that children need strong rules. They need discipline. They need that, or they can't really develop. And it's true for all of us. But that's not just for the child. It grows beyond that. We still need those rules. And then we need to learn how to break them and when to break them. But if we haven't learned to obey them first, if we haven't learned how to comply, then we're not going to learn how to healthily and appropriately break those rules when love demands, when love requires that we do so. That's what Jesus' teaching is all about. It's how to break the rules, right? know when to break the rules, how to deconstruct the rules, how to learn that the rules aren't what are going to get us to kingdom. But if we weren't following them first, then we have no basis from which to strike out. We have no foundation from which to build the second half of life and the experience of kingdom. When the rich young man comes to Jesus, what must I do for eternal life? The first thing he says, well, you know the commandments, right? And it's he starts there. He starts with the law. If you haven't learned how to comply with the law, then you're not going to be able to know how to graduate from the law. So this is all kind of stuff that's tied together.
I don't know how much I like this idea that I'm working with a number of clients who didn't have the opportunity to build a container, like that first half of life thing we're talking about. You know, trauma, abuse, you know, growing up in rough neighborhoods, jail, things of that nature. And I like the way I was working with them using this material was thinking of that as their descent. But it seems like he's saying they need to establish that a healthy ego first, then have that ego be shattered before they can make the descent. And I don't know what to do with somebody who never developed a healthy ego, but it's in the midst of like they were born in their descent.
Well, William, think of it this way, because remember where a chapter and a half back or so, he was talking about the mirroring, remember? He said, unless a child or this person in development has mirrored to them the approval and even the applause for the things that they do well, if they don't see that mirrored in the people around them, then they really can't develop this healthy ego we're talking about. You know, for the kind of kids that you're talking about, they've never had that kind of mirroring. They never had anyone who was proud of them. They never had anyone who said, well done, good and faithful servant. They never had anyone like that who mirrored them and showed them that what they were doing was healthy and good, and they could reinforce that behavior. That is, I think, your role now as the clinician, as the counselor, to be able to do that kind of mirroring that's going to help them then to be able to go forward. Because until we know we have some kind of approval in our back pocket, life is way too scary to risk much of anything, let alone the shattering of your ego, let alone the descent that we're talking about. So I think that's really part of, or the biggest piece probably of all of this, is that even with all the rules and the discipline, there also has to be that positive mirroring. The child needs to know that he or she really is approved of, loved, and accepted for no reason but because they're there at the table. You know, and then I think we can proceed from there. And I don't know if that helps you with the kind of the rebuttal you were building there.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how that aligns with my focus. I don't know. Well, this probably will take us too far off topic, but I don't know how exactly to do that.
You can't.
You know, clinically with somebody that just doesn't have the foundations of a healthy ego, like it's none of it is baked in there, like none of the ingredients are there to make a stew essentially. And it's rough when you see them in the face of crisis and they just never had a supportive voice to tell them, yeah, you can do this.
Yeah, well, you give them that voice. You know, it's not going to fix everything, but it can be one of the first planks in their foundation. You know, I think that's probably the best we can do at certain times. But yeah.
And
But
hopefully, if they're
I would
lucky,
say
that
I'm sorry, G, I was just going to say, but I don't think that point is their descent. You know, that is still their attempt to ascend and build the ego. It's just been frustrated. But that's not the kind of descent that we're really talking about in the second half of life. I'm sorry, Judy, go ahead.
no, the only thing I would add, and William, you're probably already doing this, but you know, I think they can, if they're fortunate and want to take the risk. If they get into a 12-step program, I mean, that's what the program fellowship is
Mhm.
attempting to do, at least with sponsorship and some of the tools that they can take advantage of. So you're not the only one sowing the seed. Yeah, so.
But going back to, oh, never mind, it went away.
Oh no, another derailment. William has trains all over the place in his room
I know.
now. They're all on their side. They're all in different directions.
Rolling down the hillside.
Well, if you think of it later, William, you jump back in again. Okay, so in fact, he says far too many, especially women and disadvantaged people, have lived very warped and defeated lives, put in whatever adjectives you'd rather have, because they tried to give up a self that was not there yet. This is an important paradox for most of us. And the two sides of this paradox must be made clear for the very health of individuals, families, and cultures. It's crucial for our own civilization right now. We have too many people on the extremes. Some make a sacrificial and heroic life of their, let me read that again. Some make a sacrificial and heroic life their whole identity and end up making everyone else around them sacrifice so that they can be sacrificial and heroic. Others, in selfish rebellion and without any training in letting go, refuse to sacrifice anything. Basically, if you stay in the protected first half of life beyond its natural period, you become a well-disguised narcissist or an adult infant who is also a narcissist, both of whom are often thought to be successful, good old boys by the mainstream culture. No wonder that Bill Plotkin calls us a patho-adolescent culture. The first half of life container, nevertheless, is constructed through impulse controls, traditions, group symbols, family loyalties, basic respect for authority, civil and church laws, a sense of the goodness, value, and special importance of your country, ethnicity, and religion, as for example, the Jews' sense of their chosenness. To quote Archimedes once again, you must have both a lever and a place to stand before you can move the world. The educated and sophisticated Western person today has many levers, but almost no solid place on which to stand, with either very weak identities or terribly overstated identities. This tells me we are not doing the first half of life task very well. How can we possibly get to the second? Most people are trying to build the platform of their lives all by themselves while working all the new levers at the same time. We used to call that building the airplane in the air. So I think of CEOs, business leaders, soldiers, or parents who have no principled or ethical sense of themselves and end up with some kind of pick and choose morality in the pressured moment. This pattern leaves the isolated ego in full control. I love that, the isolated ego in full control, and surely represents the hubris that will precede a lot of impending tragedies. This pattern is all probably predictable when we try to live life backwards and build ourselves a wonderful superstructure before we have laid any real foundations from culture, religion, or tradition. Frankly, it is much easier to begin rather conservative or traditional, and I know some of us do not want to hear that. But once again, conservative with a bigger C, right? It's I don't know if you've ever heard this this quote before, attributed to a lot of different people. If you're a young person and you're not a liberal, then you have no heart. But if you're older and you're not a conservative, you have no mind. That's attributed to Churchill and everybody else down the line. But if you don't think of that in a political way, right? If you think about that in a more practical way, young people are going to be liberal in the sense of idealistic, the sense of things have to be equal, things have to be fair, things have to just balance out, without any regard to the practicality of the way the world actually works. Until you've lived a while, gotten mugged, gotten beat up, tried to start a business or do all the things, raise a family, then you realize that certain practicalities have to intrude on the idealism. That's becoming more conservative in your old age. That doesn't mean that you throw away your causes and your beliefs and the things that you feel passionate about. But there is a temperament that starts to take place in an older person to realize that the idealism has to fit into the way the world actually works. And if those people are the ones who are raising children, then we have the best of all worlds, because those practical values, that wisdom of understanding the way the world works is now going to be transferred to the child, if only through sensible discipline, and sensible rules and an environment in the house that's conducive. And so I think this is where he's going with this, that those kinds of practical values of a container that is well established can then transmit that to younger generations. Most people are trying to build the platform of their lives all by themselves, while working all the new levers at the same time. That idea of building the airplane in the air, because as a child, they didn't have that kind of environment. They didn't have real adults teaching them and guiding them and disciplining them. The whole premise of ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, is that there is a predictable trajectory that kids take if they are raised in chaotic families where there is none of this that we're talking about, where they have to become, in a sense, the adults. They have to find ways to impose some kind of order and control over a situation that provides none of it for them from the adults in their lives. And so this is the kind of thing that we're talking about here. Kids who have that approval mirrored to them, kind of like William's talking about the kids that he's counseling. That's the result of not having this at an earlier stage. We don't have the chance to build that first half of life container.
So they're getting a late start and they have a really uphill battle, is what you're saying. I mean, it's not a fair start for them, but.
In fact, I remembered what I was going to say earlier, going back to one of Dave's earlier comments. The clients in this group, like when I'm trying to talk about the Paschal mystery and the descent before the ascent and, the hero's journey and the wounding and the unfairness and all of that starts things, they aren't able to hold on to that idea because that first half is just not there, so they can't really think of this wounding as a welcomed opportunity for change when the initial wounds were always in place, I guess. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but basically this second half of life kind of conversation goes nowhere with this group.
Back on page 26, that last paragraph there's a line there that I really liked. He said, "We have too many people on the extremes." That is, how old is this book? Getting to be maybe 10 years or so. How much more true is that now? Especially in the last 3 years, we got too many people on the extremes. Some make a sacrificial and heroic life their whole identity and end up making everyone else around them sacrifice so that they can be sacrificial and heroic. I think, we were just talking on Sunday about the passage where Jesus says, "Hey, not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' is going to be able to enter the kingdom." And they will complain and say, "But Lord, we did all these miraculous things in your name. We prophesied and we healed and we did this and we did that." I think it's this same kind of people here we're talking about. Too many on the extremes. Some make it sacrificial and heroic life their whole identity. But Jesus says, "But I never knew you." Because it's all about the accomplishment. It's still an ego process, right? This is their identity. This is who they are, the ones making the extremes and doing the heroic and the miraculous in Jesus' name, but they still don't know him because they're not ever in a position to have that kind of vulnerable intimacy and those experiences that really lead to a knowing in terms of of real relationship. So many of these lines are jumping out at me as connecting with the Sermon on the Mount that we've been studying for the last several months, and some of the other themes that we've been talking about in here. And I hope that you can start to see them too, and see how Jesus lines up with this. And so many of the things that he says is such good psychology, you know, when it comes right down to it. He is really addressing the human condition in ways that we don't really give him credit for until we kind of break it down a little bit more. The educated and sophisticated Western person today has many levers, but almost no solid place on which to stand, with either very weak identities or terribly overstated identities. We're not doing the first half of life task very well. You know, I think that also is very true. You know, there's so few of us who have any idea of what our identity is. You know, that's a common question I'll ask people who I'm working with. And then just tell me who you are. You know, tell me who you think you are. Who are you? You know, and it's a difficult question to answer under the best of circumstances, but some people can't even get started. You know, they don't even really understand what the question means. You know, how am I supposed to address that? So that, I think, is another standout line here.
Where was that, Dave?
Page 27, right in the middle of the first full paragraph. The educated and sophisticated Western person today has many levers, but almost no solid place on which to stand. Now, even if our identity is well formed around our egoic consciousness, that's at least a place to stand. But a lot of us don't really even have that, you know. I've been hearing a lot of people talking about the imposter syndrome lately. I don't know, it's just a kind of a wave, but you all familiar with that? You know, you feel like you're play acting at your roles in life, and you know, if people only knew, you know, they'd realize what an imposter you are. And there's so many people that feel that kind of insecurity. You know, they're at their big boy and girl jobs and they're doing this and doing that, but man, inside, haven't got a clue of where they really stand. And I think that's the kind of thing that Rohr is also talking about here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my clients, we were talking about this idea last night, you know, feeling like an imposter on some level. And I have a young lady who, you know, she runs groups at our church and counsels people and helps them with their financial planning and things of that nature. But her home life is this complete mess. And she feels like a hypocrite, you know, when she's doing her work, essentially. I shared with her, I think every clinician has that experience. You know, if I could just take my own advice, I'd be way better.
And of course, the truth of the matter is that our households aren't really totally under our control now, are they? You know, there's a few other people making some choices here besides just us.
They were in high school.
Well, I'm sorry, what was that?
My boys, when they were in high school, called people posers. And it was a way to express, you know, it was a way for them to be able to, instead of calling somebody, you know, you're really phony or you're unreal, or I can see, you know, past you. And I always laughed as they used that because it seemed to capture so much for them.
Yeah. That's sweet.
The imposter syndrome actually is very common. I read this article years ago for us new nurses or new physicians, because you're not secure yet in what you do, you're still learning. You feel as if, although you have your licenses, your certificate, you feel as if you're a fake. Not until it actually, like 10 some years later, then you say, oh yeah, it comes with that security that says, oh yeah, this is what I do and I'm good at what I do. So yeah, it's very common. But I want to go back.
I'd imagine it's much more common in the medical field because the stakes are so high. I
Yeah.
mean, good Lord, you know, you got
Look at
people's
that.
lives in your hands here.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
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 But I want to go back to page 26 where it says here, you know, the 2/3 down, too many people have extremes. Some make sacrificial heroic life as their whole identity. How is that different from the saints that we see as model of
That's a good
virtue?
question.
How is that different? They sacrifice their life and their whole identity.
Mhm. I think the difference is always going to be whether it's coming from the outside in or the inside out. You know, the people that he's talking about here who make their whole identity into a life of sacrifice and heroism are those who are conforming to what they think they're supposed to do, think they're supposed to be, in order to be approved, in order to be, you know, fill in the blank. It's kind of like, again, Thomas Merton saying, you know, people coming to contemplation by making contemplative faces at themselves in the mirror. You know, they're doing what they think they need to do in order to be this thing, and they're trying to comply with it. So it becomes another
God.
task. You know, it just becomes a task. It becomes an accomplishment to try to strive after. Rather than the saints that you're talking about, those are the ones who are transformed from the inside out. And that sacrifice, that other-centeredness that we would call heroic possibly, is flowing out of them naturally. It's the idea that James has of the law of liberty, where law is no longer a restriction. Law is an expression of the free desire and choices that we make. And so it's a whole, maybe from the outside in, it could look the same from a distance. But when you get close and right up against these people, you would know the difference instantly. You know, just by the vibe and the way that they approach things and their presence, it would be completely different. But from a distance, not so much. They could look similar. That's why Jesus is talking. Remember when we were talking about stones and loaves, you know, and snakes and fish and
Right.
so forth. He said, you know, you look from a distance, this tree looks like it's full of fruit, and you get up close and it's got nothing. This temple is beautiful, but you get inside and it's just a den of thieves. You know, he's trying to get us to make these kind of discernments. From something from a distance may look the same, but when you get up close, the fruit of it is where you're going to really see the difference. And I think it goes the same thing with what you're asking about, Ellen.
Dave, do you think that the same could be said of like the apostles that Jesus called before they experienced the resurrection, or maybe even before they experienced Pentecost, that they were still kind of in their first half of life, you know, and not quite getting what Jesus was talking about?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, as Jesus is going to Palm Sunday, you know, he's just about ready to re-enter Jerusalem. You know, he's got the two sons of thunder, James and John, fighting over, and they send their mother, no less, to Jesus. You know, hey, Mom, will you ask him if I can sit on his right hand and his left? I mean, they are absolutely clueless about what kingdom means. You know, they still think that he's going to come as this great warrior and establish a new sovereign nation, and they were going to get to be his viziers, his first lieutenants. You know, yeah, they absolutely had no clue. And even after the resurrection, they really still didn't get it. You know, they didn't recognize him when they saw him again, and so on and so forth. All of these images in the Gospels are showing us the difficulty and the time and the process that it is to get to Pentecost. I mean, it takes a long time. And it's not until Pentecost that they finally break through into full understanding of the spiritual matters that Jesus was trying to get across. So yes, absolutely. You know, and what did it take, Judy, in order to move from that first half of life following of Jesus to a second half of life? It took the crucifixion. It took that descent into losing everything that they thought that they had in Jesus before they could finally come up the other side.
That
I just realized Frank's on TV.
Right?
You know, I'm looking at this thing and it wasn't registering with me until just now. That is so cool. I love that.
Watching a show called Franctified.
Yeah, Frankified. And then I look at Randy and I think I need new glasses because what the heck is going on over there,
Randy,
Randy?
you're blurry.
Yeah, what happened to Randy?
Story of my life.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see yourself, man, but you are totally in.
Yeah, you have a window on the left side there. That's about it.
Anyways, I think we can read a little bit more. Let's go. We got a few more minutes.
Okay.
So back on page 28, first full paragraph, but I think we all need some help from the perennial tradition that is held up over time. We cannot each start at zero entirely on our own. Life is far too short. And there are plenty of mistakes we do not need to make, and some that we need to make. We are parts of social and family ecosystems that are rightly structured to keep us from falling, but also, more important, to show us how to fall, and also how to learn from that very falling. Think of the stories of the brothers Grimm, Hans Christian Andersen, or Laura Ingalls Wilder, most of which circle around a dilemma, a problem, a difficulty, a failure, an evil that begs to be overcome, and always is. We are not helping our children by always preventing them from what might be necessary falling, because you learn how to recover from falling by falling. It is precisely by falling off the bike many times that you eventually learn what the balance feels like. The skater pushing both right and left eventually goes where he or she wants to go. People who have never allowed themselves to fall are actually off balance while not realizing it at all. That is why they are so hard to live with. Please think about that for a while. Let's do that. Let's think about that. People who have never allowed themselves to fall are actually off balance while not realizing it. And that's why they're so hard to live with. Are you feeling what he's laying out here?
Mhm.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
I don't know if if there are people in your lives that have not really suffered, that life, they've been able to live life at a certain pitch where they've avoided the big traumas of life. It's kind of like that Rilke quote, if you've only overcome small things, then you end up feeling small. And I have said that pain is like perfume. You open the bottle anywhere in the room and eventually it fills the whole room. And that's true. I mean, your pain, no matter how small, is going to fill you up. But in relation to other people's pain, it can seem very trivial. For those of us who have really fallen and you've allowed yourself, in other words, you've risked something and risked failure, and you ultimately fail, quote unquote, although failure is not set in stone. It's just a temporary thing that you overcome again. But if we haven't put ourselves in that position, if we haven't allowed ourselves to risk something and fail, if we haven't allowed ourselves to love someone or something and then lose it, then we haven't experienced that which gives us that gravitas, that which Prophet Khalil Gibran talks about, the sorrow that hollows you out, but that hollowing out is just opening you up for more capacity to love. That beautiful image that he gave us there in the Prophet. These are the kind of things that he's talking about here. So we have to be able to fall, and we as parents need to allow our children to fall. Our culture has gotten to the point now where we don't want to allow anyone to ever fail. Everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets an award. You don't have winners and losers anymore, but that's not the way that the world works. And by removing any adversity or any grinding in life, then our kids don't have the opportunity to build that container that they need to build. And so all of these themes are coming to roost here in this first half of life discussion. There's this one line here in the first paragraph we read: we cannot each start at zero entirely on our own. Life is far too short. But you know what? That's exactly what we do. I mean, think about it. Every single baby is born completely tabula rasa, completely blank slate, as if coming out of this completely memory washing sleep. The child doesn't know anything. But that's where the parents come in. That's where the community around comes in, because we can teach that child about the things that would be so traumatic if they didn't know about them, or to avoid them, that they wouldn't be able to continue. I mean, have you ever thought about, if you're walking through the forest and someone tells you, you know, avoid the red berries, you can eat the blue ones, but don't eat the red ones. How many people had to die before they could tell you that? You know, if each one of us had to learn that lesson on our own, then nobody's going to survive, right? So there are things that we end up conveying to our kids that are geared toward their survival at the most basic level. And we want to give them that leg up, of course, but we don't want to remove the adversity that they need in order to be able to build that strong egoic container. I'm honoring the silence, Danielle. At any rate, is all of this ringing true enough that it sounds like it's a possibility and a way forward?
Mhm.
And this hope for stuff? Because the question is, you know, all of us are out of childhood, let's say, significantly out of childhood. So if we are in the midst of our second half of life transition, or if we are deeply into our second half of life, if we're on the cusp or wherever we happen to be, you know, it's important for us to understand these things so that we can continue the journey in a much more intentional and conscious way, and understanding the shape better so that we can also be digging in the right spot. So it's good to get these things under control. And if we realize as we're reading through this stuff that we haven't really finished developing our container, our first half of life container, then what is it that we need in order to complete that task, even at our age, so that we can really move forward? Is there some work along those lines that needs to be done? And a lot of it, I think, is going to have to do with this idea of that mirroring, because as long, especially with God, you know, if we still see God as the conditional judge in the sky, it's going to be so hard for us to feel the liberty to really risk letting go of everything that we have clutched onto thus far to continue to survive. And so that's a big part of what we're talking about here. Well, alrighty then, maybe we're done.
Well, I was thinking about that last line there, the idea that people who haven't been through this journey are hard to deal with, or hard to live with, essentially. And you know, thinking of the same client I was talking about earlier, who was, you know, is a very accomplished woman, you know, I think she just turned 40 actually. And just got married, and she's moving into a blended family. So she married a guy with 3 kids from a previous dysfunctional relationship, yada, yada, yada. And is just having a really hard time with right and wrong, you know, and, you know, the rules that have governed her life so far are just not translating with her stepkids and the husband and the ex-wife involvement and so on and so forth. And it's just, you know, the husband is finding her impossible to live with, in that he recognizes that she is this beacon of a woman who has really been, you know, he was fascinated with her when he first met her, because she was so well put together, essentially. But it seems like she hasn't had too many descents. And this marriage is kind of her first descent, essentially. And it's just really difficult, because she's very set in her understanding of how the world should work, and it doesn't translate to two teenage girls and a 12-year-old boy who sees her as the evil stepmother, and I wonder if it would be valuable to talk to her about this kind of stuff, or I sense it might be a little too early for her as well.
But if you think about it, William, this marriage is not her descent. It's her first opportunity for descent. The fact that she's resisting it is why she's so hard to live with, right?
Mhm.
And that's the difference. We're presented with all sorts of things that can be an opportunity for another hero's journey, another circuit, another descent before the next ascent. But if we don't accept the call, if we resist it, if it's still too scary, that's when things start going awry.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
I want to add too, I think and I was that. I didn't have any problems in life until I got my problem, or that fall and descent. I think on my personal story is it gave me humility.
Mm.
And I think that's the biggest thing, where the arrogance I had made me difficult to live with. With humility and wisdom, life is getting a little easier,
Mhm.
especially with teenagers. But yeah, it's the humility. And I think if we haven't gone through problems or pain, turmoil, yeah, we don't have that humility.
Mhm.
That's great, Ellen. That's perfect.
I remember Russ Hudson at one of his trainings said that you only learn humility through humiliation.
Mhm.
Not bad. I like that. I like that.
Mm.
Yeah. Hey, Vaughn, put the Eiffel Tower picture back up. Did you guys see that?
Mhm.
Can you put that back up, Vaughn?
He doesn't know how to control that.
There it is. Isn't that cool? The only way that would be better if he was with the Leaning Tower of Pisa and pushing
Yeah,
that. That would be really cool. That's a great shot. I love that.
Yeah, it's fun.
Very nice. All right. I think we're done. We're at time. And but do think about these things, everyone. Think about, as we go through this stuff, and I know we kick up a lot of stuff from the bottom of the aquarium, but just kind of live with the muddy water for a little while and see how it all starts to filter down. And think about this stuff. See where you sit in all of that. That's the most important thing. Make sure it's really relevant to where you're at and where you intend to go and all that sort of stuff. Right? So make it personal. Right. Okay,
Well,
Scotty.
can I ask something really quick?
Wait,
when you
sure.
finish a book, do you come back to it? Does the group come back to it maybe 2 years later, 3 years later?
No, we've never done that.
No.
Yeah.
Oh,
We never look back. Except for the Bible. Yes, we do come back to books of the Bible. But
because I remember reading this short novel by Edith Wharton. It's called Ethan Frome. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I read it as a high school person. I read it as a 30-some-year-old married woman. And then I read it as a 50-year-old woman. And each time there was a different interpretation of the same narrative.
Mm.
And I said, yeah, it's a different stage in my life.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I mean, I'm sure if we did this with any of the books that we've read, come back to a few years later, we would see them differently as well.
Mhm.
So,
I
maybe
wouldn't
some of the
mind
readers-
going over Everything Belongs Again.
Yeah, no, that was a great book, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, we definitely, I think, would see that differently. But it's amazing, when I come back to a book that I'm either teaching on Sunday morning or whatever, it's amazing how when I like the Sermon on the Mount, for instance, I haven't taught that since 2013. So we're talking about 7 years or something now, 9 years. And so as I look at my notes from then and now, there's a lot of changes. And I'm really changing the way that I present any given passage. So I know exactly what you're talking about, Ellen. Yeah. That's that perspective thing. Okay, Scott.
All right. Lord, thank you for tonight. Thank you for the sharing from the heart that the people do when we get in this Zoom conference together. We're looking for your truth, Lord. We're looking for your wisdom. We're looking for your way. We look to you in all things, Lord, and ask that you guide us and direct us. Illuminate that which you want us to see and pay attention to, Lord. And take away those things which we shouldn't even lay our eyes on. Lord, thank you for loving us, caring for us, and taking care of us. In your precious name, we give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Scott's, Frank's still on TV.
Right.
Yeah, that looks like the TV that I had when we were a kid.
Yeah, right.
Kind of dials there,
That's
you
a
know?
Brady Bunch TV,
That's a
right?
Brady Bunch. There
Yeah.
you go.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Where's the antenna?
The rabbit ear.
The rabbit ears, absolutely.
Little rabbit ear.
All right, everybody. Thanks and good night. See you
Bye,
Sunday.
Wendy. Bye,
Sunday.
Gabby.
Hey,
15th anniversary
Bye.
celebration. Be there.
Yeah,
One
yeah,
way or another.
definitely. Right.
Diddy.
Good night, guys.
Bye-bye.
Good chat.
All right. Good night, Jordana and Linda. Always the last two.
Okay. Good
Okay.
night, you guys.
See ya. See ya.
You're saying I
Bye.
didn't hear from you.
What, Linda?
I didn't get down what the last thing was. But I probably should have taken the time out. I'll find somebody who did get it.
Get what?
The last thing that you mentioned and you said that we should.
It's Sunday. You're going to be there. Sunday
Oh, so I'm
for the celebration. 15th anniversary celebration.
okay. We take stuff, right? To eat and all that.
I can't hear you, dear.
Do we take anything with us? to
Don't
share?
need to. Yeah, you can bring a dessert if you want to, but there'll be plenty of food. You don't need to worry about that.
Thank
Okay?
you. That's
But
pretty-
just come at the regular time. No change.
Thank you.
All right?
Yeah.
Okay.
See
See you
ya.
guys later. Bye.
Good night, guys.